Hello and welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out in the northern direction to the north of Vesele, south of Vyemka. The Russians have made a small advancement in this direction, capturing a Ukrainian fortification to the north of the control zone. And with that, we see that the Russians are inching closer to Vyemka by the road here, going towards Vyemka. It is likely that the Russians will try to advance here by the railways at the same time as the roads, capturing the fortifications one by one as they inch closer and closer to the village and develop the frontline situation in this direction. Moving further south, we see here to the south of Bakhmut in the southern flank, the Russians have made a small advancement north of Klishivka, where they've managed to capture part of this first line, advancing towards the Ukrainian fortifications here to the west of Klishivka. Is the Russians are developing their offensive operations in the Bakhmut-Chasiv Yar direction. This advance was confirmed by this geolocated footage showing a Russian tank advancing on Ukrainian positions. And this is an indication that the Russians are expanding their fighting operations to the southern flank of the Bakhmut area, which so far had been left largely unattended by the Russians, as there had been no significant advancements in the southern flank compared to the central and northern flanks, where the Russians have made several advancements and have managed to gain control over several new areas and fortifications. The Russians are now starting operations in the south, which could indicate that the Russians are pushing towards the canal, moving through the fortifications in an attempt to capture Klishivka. Based on drone footage, it is likely that Klishivka is completely abandoned by the Ukrainians, and most positions are simply in the fortifications to the northwest and west of the village, as the village itself is completely impossible to defend as there's no standing buildings left. Moving on to the next section of the front line, we see here to the northwest of Avdiivka, there is this geolocated footage of yet another Russian tank advancing on Ukrainian positions and fortifications in an attempt to gain control over the area. However, the tank was hit by a mine, although at the end of the footage the crew did survive, but the tank did not. But with this, we see that there's an attempt by the Russians here to the northwest of Berdishi to gain control over the fortifications. It will likely continue until the Russians gain full control of the fortifications to the north of Berdishi, protecting the flank of the village before moving on in a northern direction or southern direction. Either way, they have an opportunity to attack in either direction. Moving further south, we see here in the direction of Novomikhailivka, the Russians are attacking Ukrainian positions in the fortifications to the south of the town, as well as in the Dacha area to the north, where it is reported that the Ukrainians were forced to withdraw from both of these positions. However, I'm waiting for further confirmation that this has taken place. Until then, fighting is ongoing in both of these locations. The Russians are looking to gain control over both the northern and southern flanks before they move through the final parts of the town, pushing them out towards Perskivivka and Konstantinivka. In the direction of Zaporizhia and Odessa, the Russians have been hitting supply bridges across the Dnieper River and towards Ukraine from NATO countries. And in both cases, the bridge was destroyed. In the case of Odessa, the train was hit as well. And with this, we see that the Russians are hitting with precision strikes the shipments of equipment to Ukraine going through Odessa and the bridges, allowing them to cross over and supply the Ukrainian army. The Russians are now hitting the Ukrainian supply lines with their long-range missile strikes, and at the same time we see that the heavy damage towards the Ukrainian energy infrastructure will take years to repair. This means that it is not going to get any better anytime soon, but likely only deteriorate from here on out. Meanwhile, we have updates from 3 different articles talking about the current situation with supply, logistics, manpower, and equipment. The first one is one from Reuters, which says that the United States says China is boosting Russia's war machine in Ukraine. By backing Russia's war efforts, the Chinese are sending equipment, machines, machineries, and all of that stuff that is related to production to allow the Russians to increase their production capacity of their military. All of this in an attempt to help the Russians or simply make a trade where they make money from selling stuff to Russia. which in the end allows the Russians to significantly increase their production capacity of their army, both in ammunition, tank production, and everything else that they produce. The Russians simply have an exponential growth in all of those. And at the same time, European countries rebuff Kiev's calls for more air defense. Ukraine said they need 7 more Patriot systems to properly defend the country, and so far not a single country has told them we'll provide you any of that. And as such, the Ukrainians are in a position where the majority of the air defense has simply run out. They don't have any ammunition, they don't have any systems, or whatever in between that doesn't allow them to properly defend their airspace. And there's no indication that anything new is on its way. And there's this article from the Telegraph about a Ukrainian commander talking about how they are dealing with the Russian army despite the lack of manpower, ammunition, and so on. And he says that they are only able to hold back the Russians with crowd-funded drones. They simply do not have the capabilities right now to hold back any Russian advances without the mass use of the drones that are largely just crowdfunded. The Ukrainian industrial capacity of producing their own drones has been significantly limited by the Russian missile strikes and drone strikes across Ukrainian territory, both on the energy grid and the Ukrainian military industry. At the same time, there's no significant drone supply to Ukraine other than United Kingdom providing thousands of drones to Ukraine. There's no other significant provider of drones to Ukraine. This means that they largely rely on crowdfunding from civilians to allow them to pay for civilian drones, which then allows them to transform it into military drones at the front line. So they are managing to get by. However, an update on the manpower of the Ukrainian armed forces was given by the lieutenant of the 47th Brigade, Nikolai Melnik. He says that the armed forces of Ukraine is less than half staffed. 350,000 people need to be mobilized. Of them, he says, our de facto brigades are at best 40% staffed. We need about 100,000 just to block the holes, another 100,000 for reserves, and about 150,000 for demobilization, he said. Melnik believes that the state lost greatly from the new mobilization law. He agreed that to demobilize the military it is necessary to call up recruits, but the promises of demobilization and then the refusal of it will be perceived by the soldiers as an element of injustice. This is sure to decrease the morale of the Ukrainian armed forces, but a very interesting thing is the 40% staffed number. If that is generally for the entirety of the Ukrainian army, that means about 200,000 soldiers are at the front line. 100,000 to plug the holes would be at 60% staffed and 300,000 at the front. Another 100,000 for reserve, if that is for filling in and plugging the holes after that. And then 150,000 for demobilization, which is to simply continue plugging the holes, because at that point 150,000 would bring every single brigade up to 100% and then a bit. But at that point, when they have mobilized that many people, they would have lost a lot of people, which would then return back to them just being reserves and not for demobilization. And no demobilization decreases the morale of the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, while all of this is going on, there is increased tension in the Middle East. This all started with an Israeli airstrike in the country of Syria, where an Iranian diplomatic mission, including a high-ranked general of the Iranian army, was stationed in that Iranian consulate in Syria. Now, this is extremely important because what happens in the Middle East has a huge impact on what happens in the Ukraine war, so bear with me. This strike killed that Iranian general. Since then, Iran has promised revenge. This is the second time a Western country has killed an Iranian general. The first one was Donald Trump, who struck one. It was Soleimani or something like that a couple of years back when Donald Trump was president. And now we're seeing that the Israelis did this in Syria. This general was likely coordinating the response of Hezbollah and Syria during this fighting against Israel. Now, this strike is expected to be a large-scale one, especially considering that in this article, the United States claims that they have observed Iran moving military assets around internally, including drones and cruise missiles, signaling that it is possibly preparing to attack Israeli targets from inside its own territory, according to two people familiar with US intelligence. One of the people said that the US has observed Iran readying as many as 100 cruise missiles. Now, why is this important for the Ukraine war, what is happening in the Middle East? That is because the United States has already sent its own soldiers to Israel in case of Iran attacking. This means that the United States will drag itself into the war with Iran if Iran strikes Israel, or that is at least what we are led to believe. But if that is the case and the United States goes to war with Iran, then Ukraine can for sure say goodbye to any sort of possible aid from the United States. And that is practically a guaranteed loss for Ukraine. They will not be able to have any potential for getting anything other than complete defeat without US aid. And Europe would very unlikely start a war or help Ukraine with their own troops if the United States is busy in a war in the Middle East. So this means that if this happens, if Iran strikes Israel and the United States goes to war with Iran over that, Ukraine would lose. And all the focus around the whole world would probably go to this war instead of the one in Ukraine. Ukraine would go into the background and everyone would focus on the war between US, Israel, and Iran. This would have a significant impact on so many things, economically, politically, etc., that I would need to make multiple videos just to cover it, and I'll also be making multiple videos in preparation for in case this actually happens. So far, there's no guarantee this will happen, and it is extremely difficult situation to be in, so there is a lot of significant risks to all countries involved if this happens. So I really hope that some diplomatic solution comes out from this. As long as a war goes on, there's risks for escalation, so hopefully peace will return to the Middle East. Otherwise, we may see the biggest war in the Middle East or even in the 21st century. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.